The emergency room doors burst open, and a blood-soaked Navy SEAL threw a 200-pound security guard across a waiting room like he weighed nothing. Doctors scattered. Nurses screamed. The man on the gurney was gone, tactical, lethal, operating on pure combat instinct inside a fluorescent-lit hospital in the middle of the night. 3 guards couldn't hold him. A trauma surgeon fled the room. And then a quiet nurse in plain blue scrubs walked straight into the chaos, leaned close to the bleeding soldier's ear, and whispered something no one else in that building could possibly have known. The man stopped, just like that. Cold. Before we go any further, if stories like this are what you live for, hit that subscribe button right now and follow this channel so you never miss what comes next. Thousands of viewers are already watching from cities and countries all over the world, and I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city and country are you watching from tonight? Let's find out together just how far one story can reach. Now, let's get into it. The night shift at Harwich General Hospital had been slow for exactly 47 minutes, and Nora Callahan had learned over 3 years of emergency nursing that slow never stayed that way. She was restocking a supply cart in Bay 4 when she heard the ambulance bay doors slam open. Not slide, not swing, but slam, with the kind of force that meant the paramedics were running. She dropped the IV pack she was holding and moved toward the sound without thinking about it, the way she always moved, quietly and without drawing attention, keeping herself to the edges of hallways where nobody would look at her twice. Harwich General sat on the eastern edge of Port Caldwell, Virginia, a mid-sized city close enough to 3 separate military installations. The trauma nurses here treated combat-related injuries the way most hospitals treated car accidents, regularly and without surprise. The ER ran lean at night. 2 attendings, 4 nurses, 1 tech, and security rotations that barely covered the floor. It was the kind of setup that worked fine until it didn't. Tonight it wasn't working fine. The paramedics came through the doors, pushing a gurney at a speed that sent equipment carts rattling against the walls. The man strapped to it was enormous, 6'2" at least, built like someone who had never once done anything halfway in his life. His left arm was wrapped in a combat tourniquet, field applied, tight, and already darkening at the edges. There was blood on his face from a scalp wound that had dried and cracked, and fresh blood from somewhere on his torso that was soaking through a compression bandage the paramedics had clearly fought to keep in place during transport. "Military trauma, male, mid-30s, the lead paramedic called out as she pushed through the swinging door. "Found him 3 blocks from the base gate. No ID on him, no dog tags. He was conscious when we loaded him, semi-coherent by arrival. He's been combative the whole ride." GCS? 12 on scene, dropped to 10 in transit. Pupils are reactive but sluggish on the right. The attending on duty, Dr. Preston Garfield, was already moving to intercept. He was a trim, silver-haired man with the unearned confidence of someone who had never once questioned whether his judgment was right. And he assessed the patient in approximately 4 seconds before pointing at Bay 1 and waving the gurney through. Nora followed at a distance. She wasn't assigned to that bay. Dr. Garfield hadn't looked at her once in the 6 hours they'd shared this shift, which was normal. She had worked at Harwich General for 8 months, and in that time she had become effectively invisible to the senior medical staff, which most days she considered a professional accomplishment. "Get him on the monitor. I want a CBC, BMP, and trauma panel. Type and cross for 4 units. Garfield pulled on gloves and leaned over the patient, lifting the compression bandage edge with 2 fingers. He made a face. "What's his pressure?" 84/60, the paramedic said. "Start 2 large-bore IVs, wide open." Nora had drifted to the doorway of Bay 1, not entering, just watching. She told herself she was watching because it was a complicated case and she might be needed. That was true. It was also true that the moment she'd seen the field tourniquet, something had shifted in the back of her mind. A low, humming recognition that she couldn't quite name. The patient's eyes were open. That was the first thing she noticed that the others hadn't. He wasn't unconscious. He wasn't even close to unconscious. He was lying very still with his eyes partially open, tracking movement in the room in a specific pattern. Doorways, corners, the position of each person relative to the exits. She had seen that pattern before. She had done that herself. His right hand, the one not caught under the restraint strap, moved slowly toward the edge of the gurney. not reaching for anything, just moving to a position where it could reach something if needed. "Dr. Garfield," Nora said. He didn't turn around. "Not now." "He's not sedated." "I can see that. We're managing it." "He's assessing the room." Garfield turned then, not because he agreed with her, but because he found her observation irritating enough to address. He was a man who did not like being corrected by people he had decided were beneath him, and Nora Callahan occupied a specific category in his professional hierarchy. She was the nurse he referred to when he thought she couldn't hear him, as the one who probably passed her boards on the third try. He had never asked her where she trained. He had never asked her about anything, actually. "Nurse Callahan," he said, in the tone he used when he wanted to make clear that he was only speaking to her because ignoring her would take more effort than this. "The patient has a significant head injury and is in hypovolemic shock. He's not assessing anything. He's confused. If you'd like to make yourself useful, you can check on the chest pain in Bay 6. He turned back to the patient. The patient's eyes moved to Nora. Just for a second, clear and direct and assessing, nothing confused about them at all. She stepped back from the doorway and went to check on the chest pain in Bay 6. The man in Bay 6 was a retired electrician named Harold, who had indigestion and knew it, but had let his daughter convince him to come in, and he spent 40 minutes telling Nora about his daughter's overprotective tendencies while she ran his EKG and confirmed it was, in fact, indigestion. She gave him antacids and discharge paperwork and listened to 3 additional stories about his daughter, whose name was Patricia, and who Harold clearly adored even when he was pretending to be exasperated. It was the kind of interaction that reminded Nora why she had chosen this job. Not the adrenaline. She'd had enough adrenaline for several lifetimes. The ordinary human stuff. The Harold and Patricia stuff that happened 1,000 times a night in every ER in the country. She was walking Harold back to the waiting room where Patricia was sitting rigid with anxiety when she heard the crash. It came from the direction of Bay 1, and it was not a small crash. It was the sound of a significant piece of medical equipment hitting a tile floor, followed immediately by shouting, and then a sound she recognized with complete clarity as a human being in physical distress, making noise while being restrained by multiple people simultaneously. She handed Harold's discharge papers to the triage clerk, said, "Stay with him, please," and moved. The scene in Bay 1 had deteriorated past the point that Garfield's confidence could manage. The patient, whose name nobody yet knew, had pulled the IV line from his left arm, snapped the wrist restraint on his right side, and was now on his feet beside the gurney in a combat crouch that had absolutely no business being in a hospital room. The cardiac monitor was on the floor. One of the nurses, a second-year named Tobias, was against the wall holding his forearm with an expression that suggested it might be broken. Security, 2 officers, both large, were circling the patient from opposite sides, and neither one of them was moving in because neither one of them was willing to be the first. Garfield was at the far end of the room with his hands raised, not in surrender exactly, but close. "Listen to me," he was saying, in what was probably meant to be a calming voice. "You're safe. You're in a hospital. Nobody here is going to hurt you." The patient wasn't looking at him. The patient was looking at the security officers the way someone looks at things they have already calculated 17 ways to neutralize. "He needs sedation now," Garfield said, speaking to no one and everyone. "Someone get me 5 of Haldol." "Don't," Nora said it from the doorway. Garfield spun around. "Excuse me. Haldol in a traumatic brain injury with uncontrolled bleeding could drop his pressure to nothing. You'll kill him." A pause. The room was very still except for the patient's breathing, which was controlled and deliberate in a way that frightened her more than screaming would have. "Then what do you suggest?" Garfield said, his voice carrying the particular edge of a man who resented being publicly corrected even when he was wrong and knew it. "Let me talk to him." "Absolutely not. He's violent and—" He broke the restraint, not Tobias's arm. If he wanted to hurt Tobias, Tobias would be hurt. He's not violent. He's tactical. She didn't wait for permission. She moved into the room slowly, keeping her hands visible, her body angled slightly sideways. Not a threatening posture, not a submissive one, something in between that communicated both awareness and the absence of aggression. She kept her eyes on the patient's face, not his hands, because if you watched the hands, you got there too late, and also because she wanted him to see that she was looking at him, not at the threat he represented. She stopped about 4 feet away. "You're bleeding through your abdominal dressing," she said. Not gently, not with the practiced softness of someone doing a de-escalation script, just factually, the way you told someone information they needed to have. "If that continues for another 8 minutes without intervention, you will go into class 3 hemorrhagic shock and we will lose the window to keep you out of surgery. I'm going to need you to get back on that table." The patient looked at her. His eyes were dark, exhausted, and very, very awake. "Who are you?" he said. Not a question. A demand. His voice was rough from whatever the night had cost him, but the words were clear. "Nora Callahan, night shift ER. Why aren't you scared?" She held his gaze. "Get back on the table and I'll explain." Something moved through his expression. Not trust exactly. Not yet. But the beginning of something adjacent to it, which was the calculation that she might be worth the risk. He straightened out of the crouch, slowly, keeping his eyes on her the entire time, and lowered himself back onto the gurney with the controlled, deliberate movement of someone who had trained the instinct to show pain completely out of themselves. Garfield exhaled loudly behind her. "Excellent," he said, already moving forward, already reclaiming the room. "Now, let's—" "Give me 2 minutes," Nora said. "Nurse Callahan, I am the attending physician, and—" "2 minutes, Dr. Garfield, or he gets off that table again, and the next time will go differently." Another pause. She didn't turn around to see his face, but she could feel the temperature of it. He didn't say anything else. She worked fast, replaced the IV line, which he allowed without movement, checked the abdominal dressing, which was worse than she'd said. The wound beneath it was deep and the bleeding had been going longer than it should have without proper packing. She didn't ask anyone to hand her supplies. She knew where everything was in this room. She reached, and things were there, and she used them with the kind of efficiency that didn't have anything to do with being a good nurse, and everything to do with having done this in conditions that made a hospital room look unchallenging. "What's your name?" she said quietly while she worked. A long pause. "Declan." "Declan what?" Another pause, longer. "Reeves." She noted the hesitation, didn't push it. "Declan, the head wound is secondary. You knew that already. The abdominal bleed is what's going to kill you if we don't manage it. I need to know what happened. Mission." "Where?" Silence. "Okay," she said. "Then tell me this. When did you last eat?" The question surprised him. She saw it in the slight change around his eyes. "Yesterday morning." "Any medications?" "No." "Allergies?" "Sulfa." She filed it away, kept her hands moving, efficient and steady. He was watching her work the way people watched things they couldn't quite categorize. "You move like military," he said. She didn't answer. "The way you came in, the way you're standing, that's not nursing school." She applied pressure to the dressing and looked up at him. "The dressing needs to hold for at least 20 minutes while we get imaging. I need you to stay still. That's what I need from you right now." He held her gaze. "What unit?" "I'm a nurse." "Before." The room felt very quiet. She was aware of Garfield somewhere behind her, aware of the security officers still in their positions, aware of Tobias against the wall with his arm. She was aware of all of it, the same way she was always aware of everything in every room, which was one of the things she had worked very hard for 8 months to make look like ordinary anxiety. "We can talk about before later," she said. "Right now you're my patient, and I need you to hold still." He looked at her for another 3 seconds. Then he lay back on the gurney and closed his eyes. The imaging confirmed a moderate subdural contusion and a deep laceration to the oblique muscle on the left side that had been partially self-packed with material she didn't want to think too hard about. Garfield reviewed the results and ordered a surgical consult, and for approximately 90 minutes, the case moved through the system the way cases were supposed to move. Efficiently, without drama, without anyone in that bay doing anything that couldn't be explained. Nora was doing paperwork at the nursing station when Garfield materialized beside her. He didn't say anything for a moment. She kept writing. "Where did you train?" he finally said. "Registered nurse program at Barton College." she said. Completed my BSN in 2019. Before that, she looked up. Garfield's expression was not hostile exactly. It was the expression of a man who had made an assessment of someone and was now confronted with information that didn't fit it, and who was not entirely sure how to process that. He was a man who did not enjoy being wrong, which meant he was also a man who never got much practice at it. I don't know what you mean, she said. You came into that room and de-escalated a trained combat operator in under 3 minutes using posture and language that I have never seen a civilian nurse use. The way you worked that dressing— He stopped, started again. There are 2 former military nurses on this floor, and neither of them works the way you work. I'm good at my job. That's not what I'm talking about. She put down her pen, looked at him directly. Is there something you need, Dr. Garfield? Or are we done? His jaw tightened. Patient in Bay 1 is asking for you specifically. The surgical team is holding off per his request until you're present. A pause. He told the attending that you could be trusted. Something moved through her chest. She kept her face still. I'll go check on him, she said. What? Declan Reeves was sitting up in bed when she got there, which the surgical attending had apparently tried and failed to prevent. He had the look of someone who had decided that the worst of the crisis had passed and was now recalculating everything. And when Nora came through the door, he tracked her the same way he'd tracked the security officers earlier, except the quality of the attention was different. They want to take me to surgery, he said. You need surgery. I know that. He shifted, grimacing in a way he tried to make look like nothing. I wanted to ask you something first. She stood at the foot of the bed. Ask. The unit markings on the tourniquet I came in with. Did you see them? She had seen them. A small stamped code on the closure mechanism that she had recognized immediately and said nothing about, because that was the correct thing to do. I documented what I observed and followed protocol for unidentified patients. His eyes narrowed slightly. That's a very careful answer. It's a careful question. A beat of silence. Outside the bay, the hospital moved through its nighttime rhythms. Distant monitors, footsteps, the muffled conversation of the nurses' station. The people who did this, Declan said, and his voice dropped in a way that had nothing to do with the injury. They didn't want me making it to a hospital. You made it. Yeah. His eyes were steady on hers. But they know I did. And they know where I am. The fluorescent light buzzed once overhead. Nora felt the statement settle into the room like a weight. Who are they? She said. That's the part you're not going to believe. She pulled the chair from the corner and sat down. Try me. He looked at her for a long moment, and she understood that he was making a decision, not just about what to say, but about her, about what he'd seen in the last 2 hours, about what it meant. The tourniquet markings, he said. You recognized them. She didn't confirm or deny it. She waited. That code belongs to a unit that was officially decommissioned 4 years ago. He paused. Most people wouldn't know that. The people who would know that are either dead or so deep in the system they don't talk about it. His eyes didn't move from hers. So I want to know how a night shift ER nurse in Port Caldwell, Virginia, looks at a decommissioned unit marking and doesn't blink. The monitor beside him beeped steadily. The abdominal dressing was holding. His pressure had stabilized at something approaching normal, and the color in his face was coming back from the gray it had been when he came through the doors. She should end this conversation. She knew that. She should say something manageable and professional and get him into surgery, where the attending was waiting, and go back to her paperwork and Harold's discharge summary and the rest of the shift. She should do the thing she had spent 8 months building a careful, invisible life to be able to do. Instead, she said, Who told you the unit was decommissioned? Declan stilled. Because it wasn't, she said. It was reclassified. There's a difference. The paperwork reads the same, but the people are still active. His voice was very quiet. How do you know that? She stood up, moved toward the door to go get the surgical team. Get the surgery done, she said. We'll talk after. Wait! He stopped. Something shifted in his face, some internal calculation completing itself. Your hands, he said, when you were working the dressing. Most people, even surgical nurses, even trauma nurses, They get a slight tremor when someone's bleeding fast and aggressive. You had none. Zero. Not once. A pause. I've only seen that in two kinds of people: surgeons who've been doing it 20 years, and operators who've been in the field. The door was 2 steps away. "What's your name?" he said. "Your real name." She pushed through the door without answering, but her hands, at her sides where he couldn't see them, had curled into fists, not from fear, from something older than fear, from the particular tension of a buried thing that had just been asked to stay buried a little longer. She walked back to the nursing station. Garfield was at the coffee machine, and he looked up when she appeared, and whatever he saw on her face made him start to say something. She didn't give him the chance. "The patient in Bay 1 is ready for surgical," she said, and sat back down at her station and picked up her pen and held it until her hand was steady. Outside the hospital's east-facing windows, the first pale line of dawn was beginning to separate the sky from the tree line, and somewhere in the parking structure across the street, a black SUV with no plates had been sitting in the same spot for 40 minutes. The SUV was gone by 6:45. Nora noticed because she had been noticing it, cataloging its position in her peripheral vision the way she cataloged everything in this building, reflexively, without making it obvious that she was doing it. At 6:43, she had walked to the vending machine near the east corridor windows under the pretense of wanting coffee she didn't need, and the SUV had still been there, sitting at an angle that gave whoever was inside a clean sight line to both the main entrance and the ambulance bay. At 6:45, when Tobias came to tell her the surgical team had Declan Reeves in the OR and the attending wanted a nursing handoff note before end of shift, she looked again, and the space was empty. Not gone, because someone drove away. Empty. The way a space goes empty when whoever occupied it has already done what they came to do. She wrote the handoff note. She wrote it carefully and completely because incomplete documentation was the kind of thing that got patients hurt and also the kind of thing that got flagged, and she did not want anything about Declan Reeves's chart flagged by anything she had done. She listed his vitals, the IV lines, the imaging results, the surgical indication. She documented the combative episode and the restraint failure using language that was accurate and clinical and gave no indication of what she had actually observed in that room. She did not document what he had said to her at the end. When her shift ended at 7, she changed out of her scrubs in the locker room, pulled on jeans and a gray sweatshirt, and walked to her car, which was a 6-year-old Honda that she had paid cash for and registered under her current name, and she drove to her apartment, which was 12 minutes from the hospital, and she sat in the parking lot for 4 minutes before going inside. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had 2 stairwells and a fire escape accessible from her bedroom window. She had chosen it for those reasons and told herself afterward that it was because she liked the natural light. Inside, she made actual coffee, stood at the kitchen counter, and thought about the black SUV. She thought about the unit code on the tourniquet. She thought about the way Declan Reeves had said, "They know where I am." And then she made herself stop, because thinking about these things too carefully was how the version of her life she had built here started to develop cracks. And she had worked very hard on this life, and she was not ready to let it crack. She drank her coffee. She set her alarm for 2 in the afternoon. She slept. Chet. The call came at 11:17, which meant she had been asleep for approximately 3 hours and 40 minutes, which was why it took her until the 3rd ring to register that her phone was ringing and that she had instinctively picked it up and was holding it before she was fully conscious. The number was the hospital's main line. She considered not answering. Then she answered. Nora. It was Tobias. His voice had a quality to it that was different from his normal voice, tighter, quieter, like he was watching the space around him while he talked. "I'm sorry to wake you. I didn't know who else to call." She sat up. "What happened?" "The patient from Bay 1, Reeves. He came out of surgery fine. They put him in the surgical ICU on 3, and then..." A pause. "Someone came to see him, about an hour after he was settled, showed credentials to the floor nurses, said it was a security matter, said the patient was a person of interest in an active federal investigation." "What kind of credentials?" "Defense Intelligence Agency," the nurses said. "They looked real. Everyone stood back and let the guy in." Nora was already up, standing at her window, looking at the parking lot below without seeing it. And? The duty nurse did a check 20 minutes later because Reeves hadn't responded to the intercom. The DIA guy was gone. He was in distress. Not obvious, but she's experienced. She caught it. His IV line had been adjusted. The word adjusted carried enormous weight in the pause that followed it. What was in the line? Nora said. They're testing it now. But the attending she thinks it was something that would have looked like a post-surgical complication. In another hour, maybe 90 minutes, it would have presented as organ failure from the surgery. Nora pressed her palm flat against the window frame. Cold glass. She focused on that. He's alive. For now. They caught it. But Nora, another pause. The floor nurse, when she tried to report it through the normal channels, she got a call back from someone above hospital administration saying it was a security matter and to stand down from any reporting until further notice. Who authorized that? That's the part I can't get a straight answer on. She pulled the phone away from her ear for a second, thinking. Outside, the parking lot was ordinary and daylit and entirely unhelpful. Why did you call me? She said. Tobias took a breath. Because when he came out of sedation, the first thing Reeves said, before he said anything else, before he even confirmed his own name to the attending, was your name. The parking lot blurred slightly. He said it twice, Tobias continued. And then he said, tell her they moved on me already. Tell her she needs to look at what I had on me when I came in. And then the attending shut the conversation down because his pressure was spiking. Nora stood very still. What did he have on him when he came in? She said. That's the other thing. His personal effects, whatever the paramedics brought in with him, they've been signed out. The log shows they were collected at 6:12 this morning by the same person who showed DIA credentials upstairs. 6:12. 17 minutes before she'd left the building. Tobias, she said, don't repeat this conversation to anyone. If someone asks you why you called me, tell them you wanted to follow up on the handoff note. Okay? A beat. Nora, what's going on? I don't know yet, she said, and ended the call. She was back at the hospital by noon. She had changed into a collared shirt and slacks, not scrubs, because she wasn't on shift, and showing up on a day off in civilian clothes gave her a different kind of invisibility than the blue scrubs did. People who saw nurses in scrubs off shift thought about it. People who saw someone in slacks moving through a hospital hallway with a visitor badge usually thought about something else entirely. She had a visitor badge because she had a friend in the volunteer coordinator's office who had once given her a standing arrangement for visiting a patient, an arrangement she had carefully cultivated over 6 months and used exactly once before today. The surgical ICU on 3 was a controlled environment. 2 nurses per 6-bed section, a charge nurse at the central station, visitors limited to specific hours with prior authorization. Standard. What was also standard, and what most visitors didn't know, was that the housekeeping staff for the ICU operated on a different access level than visitors, could move between sections without escort, and wore color-coded badges that the nursing staff had long since stopped scrutinizing closely because the housekeeping schedule was reliable and familiar. Nora was not in housekeeping. She was in visitor slacks, and she had a visitor badge, and she was not going to walk onto the ICU floor through the front entrance. She went through the supply corridor on the west side of the building, which connected to the ICU via an internal access door that was technically supposed to be badge restricted, but which had been propped open with a rubber doorstop for approximately 7 of the 8 months she had worked here, because the housekeeping staff used it constantly and the badge reader had a lag that annoyed everyone. It was still propped open. She moved through it, turned left down the ICU corridor, and located Declan Reeves in bed 3 by the chart tag on the door frame, which she read in passing without stopping, and kept walking to the end of the hall before doubling back at a different pace. He was awake. That was the first thing she registered when she came through the door of his room and pulled it mostly shut behind her. He was awake, and he had pulled the bed control to elevate his head, and he was sitting at approximately 45 degrees, with the kind of deliberate stillness that told her everything about how much pain he was in and how hard he was working not to show it. His eyes found her immediately. You came, he said. You sent a message. I wasn't sure it would get through. His voice was rougher than it had been last night. The sedation residue and the aftermath of whatever they'd put in his line both taking their toll. How did you get in here? Doesn't matter. Tobias told me about the IV line. How are you feeling? Like someone tried to kill me twice in 12 hours? That's consistent with the information. She moved to the side of the bed, keeping herself away from the window, and looked at his monitoring. His pressure was low normal, which was acceptable for post-surgical. Pulse was elevated, which was either pain or stress or both. The person who accessed your effects this morning, do you know who sent them? I have a guess. His jaw tightened. When I came in last night, what I had on me. Personal effects were signed out by someone with DIA credentials. Those credentials were fake. How do you know? Because the DIA doesn't operate domestically without a Joint Task Force notification. Someone with real DIA credentials shows up at a civilian hospital. There's a paper trail 6 layers deep before they walk through the door. This was fast and clean. That's not DIA. She absorbed this. What did you have on you? He looked at her for a moment. The monitoring beeped. Outside the room, someone was talking at the nurse's station. Normal volume, not approaching. A drive, he said. Small, sewn into the lining of my jacket. I didn't know if the jacket made it in with me or if they stripped it at the scene. The paramedics documented a jacket in the personal effects. Then whoever came this morning has it. His expression didn't change much, but something in it became flat and deliberate in a way that she recognized as controlled anger. That drive has documentation of a program called Cartwright Protocol. 14 months of records, chain of command, financial transfers, communications. Proof that 3 senior officers operating out of a facility 30 miles north of here have been running a private intelligence operation that funnels classified mission data to a third-party contractor who sells it. The room felt very still. Sells it to who, she said. Highest bidder, doesn't matter the flag. He shifted slightly and the monitoring flickered. I was the third person to find out. The first 2 are dead. I got out of the facility 12 hours ago with the drive and a bullet that apparently did more damage than I thought. Why were you near the base gate? My contact was supposed to meet me. He didn't. A pause. I don't know if he got pulled or if he was never real. She looked at him. He looked back. You need to tell me something, he said. About last night. The way you came into that room. What you said to me. His voice dropped slightly. The code on the tourniquet. You knew it. She didn't answer immediately. I've been trying to figure out who you are since they wheeled me into the OR, he said, and I keep landing on an answer that doesn't make sense. Why doesn't it make sense? Because the person I keep landing on has been dead for 4 years. The monitoring beeped 3 times in even succession. She held his gaze and said nothing, which was itself a kind of answer, and she watched him process it. Watched the thing he thought he knew rearrange itself into something that fit better and cost more. Jesus, he said quietly, don't use that word with me. A beat. Sorry. He refocused. The unit. Vantage team. Inactive. You were the medic. She didn't confirm or deny. She moved toward the door, checked the corridor window. Clear. The drive is gone. What else can you substantiate? There are duplicates. I'm not stupid. His voice had regained some of its edge. 3 separate locations. 2 of them are accessible to people I trust. One of them, he stopped. One of them what? One of them is at an address that's tied to a name I burned 4 years ago. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully read. I didn't know that name was still walking around until about 11 hours ago. The door to the ICU bay was still closed. The corridor outside was still quiet. She had approximately 4 minutes before the nursing rotation would bring someone past this room. Where? She said. A storage unit in Kellner County, registered under the name M. Hartwell, Lot 7C. He held her gaze. Does that name mean anything to you? The fluorescent light overhead did the same faint buzz it always did. The monitoring beeped. Down the hallway, someone laughed at something a visitor said. Mara Hartwell had been her second cover identity, used during a 4-month operation in 2019 that had ended badly enough that the identity was supposed to have been burned along with everything attached to it. She did not say this out loud. "How did you get that address?" she said. "Same way I got everything else on that drive. Very carefully, over a very long time." He leaned forward slightly despite what it visibly cost him. "I wasn't looking for you specifically. I was building the Cartwright documentation, and one of the financial trails led to a safe house network that Vantage Team used. The address came up as an active storage account. I flagged it because Vantage Team was supposed to be gone. It is gone. But you're not." She stood at the door with her hand on the frame. The 4 minutes were almost up. She needed to move. "Stay alive," she said. "Don't talk to anyone who shows credentials without calling Tobias Okafor on the second floor to verify. Don't eat anything that doesn't come sealed from the hospital kitchen. Don't let anyone adjust your lines without a nurse present." That's a lot of instructions for someone who isn't involved. She pushed the door open. "Nora," his voice stopped her. "The Cartwright operation. The 3 senior officers running it. One of them signed the paperwork that declared Vantage Team inactive." She paused in the doorway. "His name is General Warren Ashby," Declan said. "Does that name mean anything to you?" She let the door close behind her without answering. Warren Ashby's name meant something to her. It meant approximately 4 years of something. She drove home by a route that added 11 minutes and included 2 unnecessary turns, which was a habit that had never fully left her even during the 8 months she had been trying to let it. She parked, went upstairs, and stood in her kitchen looking at the counter without seeing it. Ashby. She said the name once, quietly, to the empty apartment. General Warren Ashby had been the commanding officer who authorized the mission that Vantage Team ran in the Korengal Valley in October 2021. He had written the operational parameters himself, which was unusual. That level of command didn't typically engage with field-level operational specifics, and at the time, she had filed it as a sign of how seriously the mission was being taken. She had found out later, in pieces, during the long months of what came after, that the mission parameters had been written the way they were written because Ashby had wanted specific people in a specific place with minimal communication backup. What she had never been able to prove was why. Now she had a reason. She pulled out the phone she didn't use for personal calls. The prepaid one she told herself she kept for emergencies and had replaced 3 times in the past 4 years without ever needing to use it. And she turned it on. There was a number she remembered. She had committed it to memory and then dismantled every other record of it in 2022 and had not used it since. She looked at the blank screen. Then she put the phone down. She put it down because using it meant making a choice, and making that choice meant the 8 months of careful, invisible life she had built here was already over. It didn't matter whether she made the call or not. She knew that. She'd known it from the moment she recognized the tourniquet code last night. The 8 months were already over. They had ended at approximately 2:17 this morning when the ambulance bay doors opened. But there was a difference between knowing something was over and being the one who ended it. She picked the phone back up. She dialed. It rang 4 times. Then a voice she hadn't heard in 4 years said, "This number is retired." "So am I," she said. A pause. And even across that pause, she could hear the quality of the attention on the other end change, the way she'd heard attention change in rooms all her life, the almost physical shift of focus. "Calloway." The voice was controlled and careful, and she could tell the speaker was also standing somewhere they didn't want to be overheard. "We were told you were dead. Reports were inaccurate. Where are you?" "I need a verification first," she said. "Warren Ashby. What's his current status?" Another pause. Longer this time. "That's not a conversation for this channel." "Then we don't have a conversation." "Calloway? My name is Nora now. It's been 4 years. I know how long it's been." She moved to the window without thinking and stopped herself. Stepped back. "Someone tried to kill a patient at Harwick General this morning. The patient has documentation of a program called Cartwright Protocol that connects to Ashby. The documentation has been taken, but there are copies. If someone doesn't move in the next," she calculated, 18 hours, those copies become irrelevant because the patient won't be alive to authenticate them. "Is this operational?" "I'm a nurse." "Nora." The voice was very quiet now. "Is this operational?" She thought about Declan Reeves lying in a surgical ICU, with someone's attempt at a clean kill still working through his bloodstream. She thought about the black SUV in the parking structure. She thought about what it meant that Ashby's name was on the authorization paperwork for a mission that had killed 4 people she trusted. "Not yet," she said, "but if someone doesn't move by tonight, it will be. I need a location for the documentation. I'll get you a location when I know who I'm talking to, and I mean who is actually running this, not the cover structure. Things have changed in 4 years." "They have," the voice agreed. "Not all of it in the direction you'd hope." She stood in her kitchen with the afternoon light coming in flat and gray through the window and thought about the Kellner County storage unit registered to a name that should have been Ash 4 years ago. "I'm going to make a move tonight," she said. "If you're going to send support, you need to have it staged within 40 miles of Port Caldwell by 2000. If I don't hear confirmation by 1900, I go alone." "That's not how this works." "It is now." She ended the call. She pulled the battery from the phone and put both pieces in different drawers. Then she started thinking about what she needed and how to get it, and what would happen at the hospital tonight when whoever had attempted the IV line realized it hadn't worked. She was back at Harwick General by 4:30, this time in scrubs, this time through the front entrance with her badge, because being present openly was safer than being present covertly when the people looking for you were already inside the building. Garfield was not on shift. The evening attending was a woman named Dr. Sable Merritt, who had always treated Nora with indifferent professional respect, which was the most Nora had ever wanted from anyone here. She picked up a double shift without explanation, which caused the charge nurse to look at her with mild surprise and no suspicion, and she spent the first 90 minutes doing what she actually was, a competent night shift nurse working a busy ER. And it was during this 90 minutes, during the ordinary work of ordinary care, that she noticed the man. He was in the waiting room. He had been there when she arrived, and he was still there at 6, which was not impossible. Waiting rooms held people for a long time sometimes, and he had a magazine open in his lap and looked as thoroughly unremarkable as anyone in a hospital waiting area could look. But he had not been called for triage. He had not been checked in, and he was seated at an angle that gave him a direct line of sight to the nursing station and both the main corridor entrances to the treatment area. She walked past him once, returned a chart to the desk, walked past him again from the other direction. He didn't track her. His eyes stayed on the middle distance in the way people's eyes stay on the middle distance when they are carefully not looking at anything specific. She went to the nurse's station and looked at the check-in log. His name was not in it. She picked up a clipboard, walked to the waiting room, and stopped 3 feet from his chair. "Sir," she said in her best neutral nurse voice, "I don't see that you've been checked in. Can I get your name and reason for visit?" He looked up at her. His eyes were professional and flat and entirely unsurprised. "Just waiting for a friend." "Friends and family can wait in the visitor area on the 2nd floor. This area is for patients seeking treatment." A pause. He looked at her in a way that felt like reevaluation. "Thank you," he said, and stood and walked toward the exit with the measured pace of someone who had decided that direct engagement was not the optimal next move. She watched him leave. She watched him go through the doors and turn right, away from the parking structure, toward the ambulance bay. She turned back to the nursing station, keeping her posture and pace normal, keeping her expression at the particular resting neutral of a nurse who had just done a routine administrative task, and underneath that she was running calculations at a speed that the nurse persona did not have access to. They had someone inside the building, which meant they had already moved faster than she'd anticipated, which meant the 18-hour window she had given to the phone contact was too optimistic by approximately 12 hours. She picked up the intercom. "Can I get a patient status check on Declan Reeves, surgical ICU 3, she said to the ICU desk, keeping her voice even. A pause. Then the ICU charge nurse's voice, also even, but with an edge to it. "Mr. Reeves was transferred 40 minutes ago." Her hand tightened on the intercom. "Transferred where?" "That's what we're currently trying to determine," the charge nurse said. "His bed is empty and we have no transfer order in the system." The nursing station was very quiet. Nora set down the intercom handset. She looked at the doors through which the man in the waiting room had just exited. She looked at the clock, which read 6:22. Declan Reeves had been in a secured ICU with monitoring, post-surgical, in no condition to move himself anywhere. He had not been transferred by the hospital. He had been taken. And whoever had taken him had done it while she was 40 feet away, watching a decoy read a magazine in the waiting room. She was already moving toward the east corridor before she had fully formed the thought, because some calculations didn't need to be fully formed, they just needed to be fast. And the woman who had built this careful, invisible life in Port Caldwell was already partially gone, replaced by something older and considerably less gentle, and the only real question was whether she was already too late. The east corridor ran 40 feet to a T-junction, left toward radiology, right toward the service elevator bank that connected all 7 floors. Nora went right without slowing, pulling her badge from her lanyard and holding it loose in her palm the way she held things she might need fast. The service elevators were slower than the main bank, but less monitored. She hit the call button and waited 3 seconds, and then took the stairs because 3 seconds was already too long. 3rd floor, ICU. She came out of the stairwell into the corridor and walked at the pace of someone who belonged there, which she did, technically, even on her worst day. And the charge nurse at the ICU station, a heavy-set woman named Patrice, who had been doing this job since before Nora was born, looked up and registered her presence without alarm. "You're the one who called down," Patrice said. "What happened?" "I don't know what happened. That's the problem." Patrice turned her monitor screen slightly to show a transfer log with a field that read, "Authorized by," and then a name that Nora read once and recognized as constructed, a real-sounding name with a real-looking employee ID that would trace back to nothing if you ran it tonight, and possibly to a terminated contractor ID if you ran it next week. Transfer order came through the system at 17:52, looked complete, looked normal. By the time my nurse went in to do the 1800 check, the bed was empty. Was anyone with him when he was moved? 2 orderlies and what my nurse said looked like a physician escort. She didn't recognize the physician, but that's not unusual with surgical consultants. Patrice's expression was that of a woman who was professionally holding herself together while being very angry. "I've called administration, I've called security. Security is telling me to wait for their supervisor, who is apparently not on site." "Which way did the transport go?" "My nurse said they went toward the freight elevator, not the main corridor." "Freight elevator." Ground floor freight access led out to the loading dock on the building's north side, away from the ambulance bay, away from the main entrance cameras, into a service corridor that connected to the north parking structure. She was already turning back toward the stairwell. "Nora." Patrice's voice stopped her. The older woman was looking at her with an expression that had shifted from professional to something more direct. "You're not going to wait for security." "I'm going to check the loading dock," Nora said, which was true the same way a lot of things she said were true. "If you find him," Patrice said carefully, "I need to know he's alive." "So do I," Nora said, and went back through the stairwell door. She took the stairs down faster than was advisable and came out at the ground floor service level, which smelled of industrial cleaner and the particular flat cold of a space that stayed at 62 degrees because the equipment preferred it. The freight elevator was at the end of the corridor, its doors open and empty, which told her nothing except that it had been used and left. The loading dock access was through a set of heavy fire doors at the corridor's north end. She pushed through them and came out onto the dock, which was a concrete platform about 8 feet off the ground, with a hydraulic ramp on the left side and 3 dock bays to the right. 2 of the bays were empty. The third had a van backed up to it, unmarked, white, the kind of vehicle that disappeared into any urban environment because it was identical to 40,000 other vehicles doing legitimate work. The van's rear doors were closed. The engine was running. She was on the dock and moving toward the ramp before she had finished calculating the odds, which was either a tactical error or the only viable option, depending on how you looked at it. She looked at it as the only viable option. She got to the van's passenger side and tried the door. Locked. She moved to the rear and put her ear to the door for 2 seconds. Heard movement inside. Heard a voice say something clipped and directive, and then stepped back and looked at the dock bay itself, at the hydraulic controls on the right side of the bay, at the wheel chocks that were sitting 3 feet from the van's rear tires, She kicked the wheel chocks under the rear tires in two fast moves, grabbed the hydraulic control panel, and hit the raise button. The dock bay began to lift. The van shifted as the platform came up under the rear tires, and the driver, who clearly felt the change, hit the accelerator, and the rear tires spun against the chocks and the rising platform in a combination that wasn't enough to move the vehicle, but was definitely enough to create noise and vibration that communicated to everyone inside that something had gone wrong. The rear doors burst open. The man who came out first was large and fast, and she was already moving, not toward him but left, toward the edge of the platform, because meeting a larger opponent in a direct line was not the starting position she would have chosen even when she was 28 and current and had both her ACLs in original condition. She was 34 and had been a nurse for 8 months, and before that had spent 4 years trying to be no one. And what she had instead of peak conditioning was the particular advantage of someone who had been in enough bad situations to know that the first 3 seconds determined everything. He came at her expecting someone who would move back or freeze. She moved forward and left, let his momentum carry past her, got her left hand on his right wrist, and used the forward energy to redirect him into the dock bay wall, with enough force that the impact told her his shoulder would be a problem for the next several weeks. He made a sound and went down to one knee. The second man was already out of the van. He was smarter. He stopped at the van doors and assessed, which was the right call, and he had something in his right hand that she made as a compact taser, which meant he was operating under instructions to deliver Declan Reeves somewhere alive and was extending that same operational constraint to anyone who appeared in the process. "Step back," he said. She stepped back. Not because he told her to, because it put the first man still on his knee between herself and him, and because stepping back put her at the corner of the dock where the hydraulic control panel was still running. "Who are you?" he said. "Charge nurse. I noticed the transfer looked wrong." She kept her voice plain, kept her hands where he could see them. "I'm trying to understand what's happening to my patient." "Your patient is being transferred to a federal medical facility under authorization from Can I see the authorization?" His jaw tightened. "Federal transfers require patient consent unless the patient is incapacitated," she said. "Mr. Reeves was conscious and alert at 1800. Standard protocol is verbal consent documented by 2 staff members. I'm asking to see the consent form." The first man was getting back to his feet. She noted it, noted his right arm hanging slightly lower than his left, noted he was not moving toward her yet. "This doesn't concern nursing staff," the second man said. "Involuntary transfer of a post-surgical patient absolutely concerns nursing staff. If there's been a protocol violation, I'm required by law to document it before the patient leaves this facility." She took one slow step toward the van. "I just need to confirm he's stable for transport. That's all." The second man looked at her. She looked back. The hydraulic platform had reached its upper stop, and the motor had cut out, and the loading dock was very quiet, in the way outdoor spaces got quiet when the ambient sound of the city decided to take a breath. "He's stable," the second man said. "Let me confirm that." Another pause. He was calculating. She was counting. 2 minutes, he said finally, because he was also calculating that a nurse making a scene on a loading dock was more operationally inconvenient than a brief delay. She moved to the rear of the van. Declan Reeves was on a transport gurney, wrists restrained, IV line in his left arm that was not the same line she had documented in his chart. He was conscious, pale, visibly in pain, and when he saw her, his expression cycled through about 4 things in 1 second. "Hey," she said it quietly, like she was checking on a patient, like everything was routine. "Hey," his voice was rough. "How are you feeling?" "Been better." His eyes moved to the man behind her, back to her. "Significantly better than I expected to feel right now." She checked his pulse at the wrist. Too fast, but present. Checked the IV line insertion point, which was correct if not ideal. Made herself work slowly and thoroughly the way a nurse confirmed transport stability. And while she did, she angled her body so the man in the doorway couldn't see her left hand. And with her left hand, she closed 3 of Declan's fingers around the small object she had taken from the hydraulic control panel. A keyed override fob for the dock equipment, which was not useful to him in its current application, but which had a secondary function she was betting he would recognize when he needed it. "He's stable for short transport," she said, turning back to the doorway. I'll need to document this in the chart. Can I get the receiving facility information? We'll provide that to administration. Okay? She stepped back out of the van, kept her hands visible. I'll need your names for the incident report. What incident? The hydraulic malfunction when you were trying to pull out. Standard documentation. She gestured at the raised dock platform. Probably just a sensor issue, but I have to note it. He looked at her with the specific expression of someone who was 90% sure they were being managed and was not entirely wrong about that. Collins, he said, and that's all you're getting. Thank you, Mr. Collins. She stepped back toward the dock bay controls. I'll get the ramp lowered for you. He watched her. She hit the lower control. The platform descended. The first man was on his feet, staying back, doing his own assessment of his shoulder in the way people catalog damage without showing it. She stood at the control panel while the ramp lowered and the van's rear doors closed and the vehicle pulled out of the dock bay. She stood there until it was gone, and then she pulled out her phone and typed a 10-digit string from memory into a text message and sent it to a number that the prepaid phone no longer existed to receive, which meant she was sending it to the number she had memorized as the backup contact and had never used. The text read, NP, Mobile Transport. White van, no plates visible, North Dock exit, timestamp 1-847. One package, 2 escorts, request intercept. She hit send. Then she stood on the loading dock with the smell of exhaust and industrial cleaner and early evening cold, and she thought about the look on Declan's face when she'd told him she'd confirm he was stable for transport. The moment where he'd understood what she was doing and had made himself go along with it, which cost him something. She could see it had cost him something, because the alternative that she had prevented was worse. She went back inside. Garfield was at the nursing station when she came back onto the ER floor, which was not supposed to happen because he wasn't scheduled until tomorrow, and the fact of his presence registered in her as a warning before she had consciously identified why. He was talking to a man she didn't recognize. The man was in civilian clothes, gray jacket, no visible ID, and he was standing at the angle that the man in the waiting room had stood at, and he was doing the same thing with his eyes. She changed direction before Garfield looked up, went to the supply corridor, and moved through it to the staff break room, where she stood for 12 seconds considering her options. The man with Garfield was not a patient. Garfield showing up off schedule meant either he had been called in or he had been brought in, and the specific combination of both things at once meant someone had decided that the direct approach at the ICU hadn't been efficient enough and had widened the net. She had 2 phone calls she needed to make, and approximately 6 minutes before Garfield's companion decided to widen his own search pattern. She called Tobias first. He picked up on the second ring. Nora. Don't use my name. Are you in the building? Yeah, I picked up the evening. What? I need you to go to the ICU and tell Patrice that a nursing staff member confirmed patient stability for transport. That's all. Exactly those words. Then I need you to stay away from the 3rd floor until I tell you otherwise. A pause. Okay. And Tobias, the man at the nursing station with Garfield, can you see the station from where you are? She heard movement, a door. Yeah, older guy, gray jacket. Don't interact with him. If he tries to talk to you, tell him you're on an errand for the charge nurse and keep walking. Nora, what is going on? I'll tell you everything I can as soon as I can. She ended the call. The second call was the one she didn't want to make. She had another number, not the backup contact, not the prepaid channel. A number that existed in a different layer of the same operational structure, the kind of number that got answered at any hour, and by people who had more authority than she was comfortable asking favors from. She called it. 3 rings. Identification, said a voice that was not a person she knew, which was how it worked at this level. She gave her old service number, heard the brief silence of a system running it. Hold. 45 seconds. 45 seconds during which she stood in the staff break room listening to the building around her. The ER's ambient sounds, the distant intercom, someone laughing 2 rooms over, and thought about the fact that she had left this world behind at considerable personal cost and was currently standing inside it again, up to her sternum with no clean exit available. A different voice came on. This one she knew. I was wondering, said Deputy Director Carla Voss, when you were going to stop calling the small numbers. Nora exhaled slowly. I need a location trace on a white transport van that exited Harwick General's North Loading Dock at approximately 1847. The patient inside is a material witness to a domestic intelligence operation that involves at minimum 3 senior active duty officers. We're aware of Cartwright. That stopped her. How long have you been aware? Longer than you want to know. Voss's voice was its usual register, measured, dry, carrying the particular weight of someone who had spent a career making decisions that other people had to live with. The situation became operational approximately 6 hours ago when one of our assets sent an intercept from the Kellner County location. The storage unit. Lot 7C, Mara Hartwell. Someone accessed the unit, Nora said. Someone tried to. The access triggered our alert. The unit's contents are intact. A pause. We've been waiting for you to make contact since 1400. Why didn't you reach out? Because you burned your channels 4 years ago, and you know why. She did know why. She didn't want to have this conversation right now. The van, she said. We're running the CCTV from the corridor. Give me 8 minutes. I don't have 8 minutes. Whoever is orchestrating this has someone inside my hospital talking to the attending physician who spent the last 8 months making my professional life difficult, which means they built a local asset before tonight, which means they knew where I was before Reeves showed up. The silence on the other end was the specific silence of new information being rapidly reorganized. Say that again, Voss said. They knew where I was. Garfield, the attending. Someone turned him, or they have something on him, and they're using him as a locator, which means this isn't just about Reeves and the drive. They've been tracking the Vantage Team survivors, and I've been the only one stupid enough to stay in one place long enough to find. You've been at that hospital for 8 months. And they moved the night Reeves came in, which means Reeves coming in was a trigger, not a coincidence. Someone saw him access the Cartwright material and used it to locate both of us at once. Another silence. Then, there's a tactical team 40 minutes out. I need the van location in 4. Nora. The use of her current name was deliberate. We're going to need you operational on this. I'm a nurse. You're currently running a solo interdiction operation from a hospital break room. Don't insult either of us. She pressed her palm flat against the wall. Cold cinder block. She focused on that. The van location, she said. 4 minutes. And I need whatever you have on Ashby's current position. Ashby is at the Kellner facility. What facility? The one that didn't make it into any of the Cartwright documentation because it was built after the program went dark. It's about 30 miles north of you. Voss paused. It's also where Reeves is being taken. What? She had 3 minutes to move before Garfield's companion came looking, and she used one of them to change her thinking about what tonight was going to cost. 30 miles north, an off-books facility. Ashby on site. Declan Reeves being transported there in a white van by 2 men who thought they had a nurse convinced and contained. She had given Reeves the override fob. The fob had a passive RFID component that broadcast on a frequency she happened to know because she had spent 4 years doing nothing, and one of the things she had done during that nothing was learn every piece of standard issue equipment that the units she used to work with carried, cataloged, and occasionally left behind. The fob would broadcast for approximately 6 hours after activation. It was activated when it was removed from its dock. She had removed it from its dock. She thought about the man called Collins, who had been competent and controlled and willing to show her the patient to avoid a scene. She thought about what competent and controlled people did when a situation changed on them, and she thought about what Declan Reeves had understood from the override fob when she pressed it into his palm. She went back through the supply corridor, back to the ER floor, and she walked to the nursing station where Garfield was still talking to the man in the gray jacket, and she walked directly up to both of them, because hesitation was the most dangerous thing she could do right now. Dr. Garfield, she said, I need to flag something about the Reeves transfer for the incident report. Can I have 2 minutes? Garfield looked at her. Something in his expression was off. Not hostile, but displaced, like a man trying to remember where he'd put something important. We were actually, he started. It'll take 2 minutes, she said, and looked directly at the man in the gray jacket, and held the look long enough to be clear that she saw him exactly as what he was. "I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name." The man looked back at her, the same assessment she'd gotten on the loading dock. "Mercer," he said. "Are you a patient, Mr. Mercer?" A beat. "No." "Then I'll need to ask you to use the visitor waiting area while I speak with Dr. Garfield, hospital policy." She said it the same way she said everything from behind the nurse persona, plainly, professionally, with the faint, unarguable authority of someone who knew the rules of this building better than the person she was talking to. Mercer looked at Garfield. Garfield, to his minimal credit, looked conflicted. "It's fine," Garfield said to Mercer. 2 minutes." Mercer moved toward the waiting area, slowly, keeping them in his peripheral vision. She pulled Garfield 2 steps toward the corridor and turned her back to Mercer's sightline. "What did you tell him?" she said quietly. Garfield went still in a way that confirmed it. "Preston." She used his first name deliberately, the one they never used with each other, and watched his jaw tighten. "Whatever they offered you or threatened you with, it's not going to hold. The people running this are about to have a very bad night, and anyone they recruited in the last 72 hours is going to be in the documentation when it's over." "I don't know what you're—" "You called them. When you came in off schedule tonight, you called them and told them I was here." She watched his face and saw that she was right, and saw that he knew she knew. Was it a threat or was it money? His jaw was tight enough she could see the muscle working. "They said you were a security risk, that you were operating under a false identity that had national security implications, that I was legally obligated. Who told you that?" "A man named—" He stopped. "Ashby," she said. He stared at her. "General Warren Ashby, or someone acting under his direction." She kept her voice very low. "Preston, I need you to hear me right now. Whatever you were told about me, the correct word for it is bait. They used me to locate someone else, and you helped them do it. And when the investigation opens, and it's opening tonight, your name is going to be in the call log." His face had gone the particular color of someone whose blood pressure was doing something it shouldn't. "What investigation?" "The kind that comes with a DOJ attorney and a mandatory interview." She let that sit for 1 second. "Unless you do something right now that goes on the other side of the ledger." He looked at her. He looked at Mercer across the waiting room. He looked like a man who had made a small, expedient decision 6 hours ago and was only now fully experiencing the dimensions of it. "What do you need?" he said. "Keep Mercer here. Tell him I went to pull documentation and I'll be back in 10 minutes. You can do that convincingly because you've been underestimating me for 8 months and it will come naturally." Something moved through his face that she didn't have time to examine. 10 minutes, she said. "That's all I need." She turned and walked toward the east corridor, and she did not look back to see if he was going to do it, because she needed both hands for what came next, and doubt was a thing she put away the same way she put away everything she couldn't use right now, which was a skill she had practiced until it felt like something close to peace, but was actually something else entirely. In her pocket, her phone buzzed. One text. Unknown number, which was how Voss's office sent location data. She opened it. Coordinates, and below them, asset mobile. Signal active. Facility confirmed. ET. Atactical, 38 minutes. She read it twice, fixed the coordinates in her memory, and deleted the text. 38 minutes for tactical support. The facility was 30 miles north. She did the arithmetic. She had been doing arithmetic like this for a long time, and the answer it kept producing was the one she'd known since the loading dock. Maybe since the phone call this afternoon. Maybe since 2:17 this morning, when a blood-covered soldier named Declan Reeves had come through the ambulance doors and looked at her with eyes that were entirely, inconveniently awake. She went to her locker. Inside, beneath the spare set of scrubs and the lunch bag she forgot to take home twice a week, was a flat metal box she had told herself was emergency preparedness and had known the whole time was something else. She opened it. Inside was a set of car keys, a folded document with an identity she hadn't used in 8 months, $400 in cash, and a compact medical kit that did not contain the things a nurse's kit contained. She took the keys. She did not take the identity because she was done with that. She went to the parking structure's lower level, to a gray sedan that was registered to a name she was retiring effective tonight, and she started the engine and pulled out of the structure and turned north. She had driven this road exactly once before, on a Sunday morning 3 months ago, when she had taken a wrong turn during a run and had gone 6 miles in the wrong direction before she'd recognized the territory, and she had turned around and not thought about it again because she'd been 8 months into not thinking about things. The road opened into highway. The city lights thinned. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced at it. Not Voss. Not the backup number. A number she didn't recognize, which at this point in the evening meant a number she should treat as hostile until demonstrated otherwise. She answered it anyway. "Nora Callahan," said a voice that was unhurried and authoritative and entirely familiar to her from briefings she had attended 4 years ago under different lighting and a different name. "Or whoever you're calling yourself these days, I think it's time we spoke directly." The highway stretched north. The facility was 26 miles ahead. "General Ashby," she said, "I'm told you've been making things complicated tonight." "I've been working my shift." A low sound that might have been amusement. "You know what I appreciate about you, Lieutenant Commander? You've always been consistent, even when it wasn't in your best interest." "What do you want?" "The same thing I've always wanted," Ashby said, "for the past to stay where it is." A pause. "I have your patient, and I have something else. Something that was left at a storage facility in Kellner County under the name Mara Hartwell." The road was dark and straight, and the dashboard lit the inside of the car in pale green. She kept driving. "The unit was flagged on access," she said. "Yes, my people found that disappointing." He didn't sound disappointed. "The materials have been retrieved, which means the only remaining problem in this situation is the one currently driving north on Route 9. She absorbed this, kept her voice level. "If you've pulled the materials from the unit, you don't need me." "I don't need you as a problem," he said. "I might need you as something else." "What?" A pause that had weight to it. "There are 17 minutes of recording on that drive, Lieutenant Commander. 17 minutes from a debrief that took place after the Korengal mission. You know which debrief I mean." His voice stayed even, unhurried. "In those 17 minutes, you said things that, taken out of the full context of the situation, present a version of events that I would find professionally inconvenient." She understood. The recording wasn't operational intelligence. It was her voice, in the aftermath of the mission that had killed 4 people, saying what she had actually believed in that room about how the mission had been constructed, about what she'd understood about the chain of command, about what she'd suspected and couldn't prove. Ashby hadn't been trying to retrieve the Cartwright documentation. He'd been trying to retrieve her. "Come in," he said. "Talk to me. We can reach an arrangement that protects both of us." She thought about Declan Reeves on a transport gurney with a field-applied tourniquet and eyes that were entirely awake. She thought about 4 people she had trained with and trusted and had watched be buried, and about the mission parameters that had put them in that valley at that time in that configuration. She thought about what she had said in the debrief, and she thought about the fact that she had said it because she believed it was true and still did. "I'm listening," she said. And she wasn't, not to him, because 38 minutes had been 20 minutes ago, and a tactical team that was currently 40 miles out had probably already revised that estimate, and she needed them to know exactly what they were driving into. She kept him talking. She reached for her phone. And somewhere in the dark 30 miles north, in a facility that didn't exist in any documentation that Cartwright had produced, a RFID fob, in a post-surgical patient's hand was broadcasting a signal that said, "Here, here, here, here," as steady and persistent as a heartbeat. She kept Ashby talking for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. It wasn't difficult. Men like Ashby had spent careers being listened to, and the specific pleasure of speaking to someone who had once operated under his command and was now, as he understood it, cornered and negotiating. That pleasure made him expansive in a way that operational discipline should have prevented. He talked about the Korengal debrief. He talked about the nature of classified programs and the necessity of difficult decisions. He talked about her future in terms that made it sound like he was offering her something rather than describing what he intended to take. She let him talk. While he talked, she used her thumb on the phone's secondary function, an old field habit, 2-phone operation, 1 ear on the conversation and 1 hand on the second device, and she sent a text to the number Voss had used. 6 words. Active site, North 9, 17 minutes. Then she sent the coordinates from the earlier message, which she had memorized and deleted but not forgotten, because she did not forget things she had fixed in memory. That was another habit she'd never managed to leave behind. The arrangement I'm proposing, Ashby said, is straightforward. The recording disappears. Your current situation stays intact. You've built something in Port Caldwell. I understand that. I'm not interested in destroying it. What do you want in exchange? She said. Reeves, specifically whatever he told you about what he was carrying and where the copies are. She was 17 miles from the coordinates. He didn't tell me much, she said. He told you enough to send you to the dock. I'm a nurse. I noticed a transfer that didn't follow protocol. Nora. He said her current name with a patience that was its own kind of pressure. I've been doing this for 31 years. I know what a nurse looks like, and I know what you look like. And those are not the same thing regardless of what your current badge says. Give me something I can use and I'll give you your life back. 14 miles. The copies, she said. He mentioned 2 locations. I only know one of them. Tell me. A contact in the D.C. area. Someone named Farrow. That's all I have. A pause. She heard something on his end. Movement, a door. Farrow? He said to someone in the room with him, and then his voice came back fully. If that checks out, we can talk about next steps. I need to know he's alive, she said. Reeves is uncomfortable but functional. He'll stay that way as long as this conversation continues to be productive. 11 miles. She thought about what she'd said to Preston Garfield, about the other side of the ledger, about doing something right now. General, she said, I want to ask you something directly. Go ahead. The Korengal mission, the operational parameters, you wrote them yourself. A silence that had texture to it. That was a complex situation, he said. 4 people died because the communication backup was cut before the extraction window opened. That was in the parameters. You specified a comms blackout from hour 3 to hour 6. The ambush happened at hour 4. She kept her voice the same. Level, professional, the same register she used to tell a patient their imaging results. That's not a difficult situation. That's a specific decision. The silence extended. You're not negotiating anymore, he said. No. Then what are you doing? 8 miles. Keeping you on the line, she said, and ended the call. She put the phone on the passenger seat and drove. But the facility showed up as a low cluster of buildings set back from the road behind a perimeter fence that was understated enough to look industrial from the highway and would stop a vehicle moving at speed without looking like it was designed to. No signage. 1 access road. 2 visible cameras on the fence line, and at least 2 more she identified by the angle of their housings as she rolled slowly past the main gate without stopping, doing what any driver did at an unfamiliar address in the dark. Slowing to check the numbers, finding them wrong, moving on. She went a quarter mile past the entrance and pulled onto the shoulder behind a tree line. The facility was not large. 4 structures, a main building, 2 secondary buildings that looked like modified storage, and a structure at the north end that had the footprint of a small vehicle bay. The fence was chain-link topped with flat wire rather than razor. Adequate deterrent, not designed for serious containment. The lighting was perimeter-focused, which meant the areas between the buildings ran darker than the fence line itself. She sat with the engine off and thought about what she had and didn't have. What she didn't have: tactical gear, a team, a communication channel that wasn't already potentially flagged, or any illusions about her current physical state relative to the people inside that fence. What she had: 17 minutes of lead time that were now approximately 4 minutes, a medical kit, car keys, and 4 years of doing nothing except learning how to be present in a building without anyone noticing her. She took the medical kit. She went over the fence at a point 40 meters from the nearest camera, which put her in the dark corridor between the main building and the southern secondary structure. The fence was 6 feet, and she made it over in a way that was functional rather than elegant, snagging her left sleeve on the top wire and hearing it tear, and landing on the inside with her left palm hitting the ground first and her wrist complaining about it in a manner she chose to disregard. The ground inside the perimeter was gravel over compacted dirt. She moved along the wall of the southern secondary structure, keeping her profile low, and she was conscious the whole time of how exposed she was. Not frightened exactly, because fear, as a visceral response, had largely given way in her to something more like heightened calculation, but aware of the specific vulnerability of operating without support in an unknown environment. She reached the corner of the secondary structure and looked across toward the main building. There were two men at the main entrance, not guards in any formal sense, no uniforms, civilian clothing, but standing in positions that weren't casual. One of them was on a phone. The other was watching the access road. She moved away from the entrance, around the back of the secondary structure, toward the vehicle bay at the north end. The white van was there. The rear doors were open and the van was empty, which told her Reeves had been moved inside, and the driver was standing beside the van talking to a third man she hadn't seen from the road. Both of them were watching the vehicle bay entrance with the posture of people waiting to be told something. She came around the side of the vehicle bay in the dark and stopped. From here, she could see through the vehicle bay into a short connector corridor that led to the back of the main building. The connector corridor had one door at the far end, and the door was lit from inside by the flat white light of a room with overhead fluorescence. She needed to be in that corridor. The driver and the third man were between her and it. She looked at the van. The van's keys were in the ignition. She could see them from here, catching the light. The driver had left them in because he'd expected this to be a brief stop, and because leaving keys in a vehicle inside a secure perimeter was the kind of small operational sloppiness that happened when people were confident they controlled the environment. She moved back around the outside of the vehicle bay to the passenger side of the van, opened the door without the interior light triggering. It didn't trigger because the door was already slightly ajar, and reached across to the ignition and put the van in neutral. The van was on a slight grade inside the vehicle bay. She had noticed the grade when she'd looked at the bay entrance because she noticed grades as a matter of habit, and the grade was gentle but present, and it was oriented toward the bay's open door, which was oriented toward the access road. She released the parking brake. The van moved. Not fast, not dramatically. It moved the way vehicles on gentle grades move when released, slowly at first, and then with increasing confidence, the way a thought becomes a decision. The driver noticed it in the first 3 seconds and said something, and both men moved toward it, and she moved in the opposite direction, through the vehicle bay, into the connector corridor, and through the door at the far end. The room was a converted conference space. Long table, chairs pushed to the walls, a portable medical monitor in the corner that was connected to absolutely nothing because whoever had set it up had plugged it into a power strip rather than a wall outlet, and the power strip was not switched on. She noticed this because she noticed medical equipment the way other people noticed furniture, and she noticed it while she was also processing the rest of the room, which contained Declan Reeves on a transport chair with his wrists zip-tied to the armrests, and a man standing against the far wall who had a tablet in his hand and had looked up at her entrance with an expression that moved through surprise and into something harder in the span of about 1 second. Reeves saw her. His face did something complicated, relief running into concern, the concern being specifically about the man against the wall, which was useful information. "Room's occupied," the man said. He had the tablet in his left hand and his right hand had moved to his hip. "I work with the medical team," she said. "There's a vehicle situation in the bay. Driver needs an extra person to secure it." "There's no medical team." "I was told to report to this room," she said, and kept moving, not toward the man, toward Reeves, toward the monitor in the corner, because moving toward what you're pretending to do was always better than standing still and being assessed. "Stop," the man said. She stopped. Turned to face him. He was mid-40s, fit, carrying a specific kind of physical confidence that she recognized as trained rather than natural. "Who sent you in here?" he said. "Collins." The hesitation was half a second. The name had landed. She moved in the half second. Not heroically, she crossed 3 steps of distance and put the portable monitor between them while he was still processing whether Collins was plausible. And when his right hand came up with the weapon, she was already beside the monitor stand, and she pushed the stand directly into his path, and it hit him at knee level while his attention was on her hands, and he went down. Not because the impact was decisive, but because he was off balance, and the floor was tile, and his left hand was occupied with the tablet. She got the weapon. It was a compact 9mm, and she cleared it by instinct, checked the chamber, found it loaded, safed it, while the man was getting back up, and by the time he was up she had it, and he didn't, and the math of the room had changed. "Stay there," she said. He stayed. She moved to Reeves. The zip ties were standard construction, not the heavy-duty rated kind, the kind that came in industrial packs from General Supply, and she found a seam on the table edge and used it, which was slower than a blade and faster than trying to find one. His right hand came free. He worked the left himself. "Can you walk?" she said. "Walked in here from the van," he said. "Under my own power, technically. Encouragement may have been applied. Meaning I walked." She handed him the weapon, which he took without comment, and checked again in the automatic way of someone for whom checking a weapon was as instinctive as breathing. "Door behind me leads to the vehicle bay," she said. "Bay probably has 2 people in it who are occupied with a vehicle issue for another 60 to 90 seconds. There's a fence on the north side, 1/4 mile up the access road on the left. There's a gray sedan on the shoulder. Keys." She put them in his hand. "What about you?" he said. "I need 2 minutes in this building." She looked at the man against the wall, who had made the correct assessment of the situation and was staying where he was. "He's going to stay in this room." "I'm going to stay in this room," the man confirmed, in the tone of someone who had revised their priorities and arrived at a sensible new arrangement. "Nora." Reeves was on his feet. He was pale and his left arm wasn't moving quite right, and there was a stain on his shirt at the surgical site that might have been old or might not have been. "What's in this building that you need?" She was already moving toward the door on the far wall, the one that led deeper into the main structure, not back to the vehicle bay. "Ashby," she said. "He's here." "He told me he was here." She paused at the door. "And he has a recording. 17 minutes from a debrief after Korengal. He said he retrieved it from the storage unit." Reeves was still for a moment. "Go," he said. "I'll hold the car." The main building had 3 interior corridors arranged in a rough H shape, and she moved through them the way she moved through hospital hallways at 2 in the morning, quickly and without appearing to be in a hurry, which was its own skill and one that served identical purposes in both environments. She encountered one person in the first corridor, a woman carrying a laptop who looked at Nora's torn sleeve and civilian clothes and registered them as wrong, but not wrong enough to stop walking, which was the specific social calculation that people made when they were in a focused operational environment and somebody else's problem wasn't currently their problem. Second corridor. Offices. The building had been converted from something industrial. The ceiling was too high for an office building. The windows were the wrong size. The floor was concrete under thin carpet, and the conversion had been recent enough that the smell of new partition walls was still present. The room at the end of the second corridor had light underneath its door and 2 voices inside it. She stopped, listened. One voice was Ashby's. The other she placed in the second as the man from the dock, Collins, who was telling Ashby about the situation in the vehicle bay with the speed and compression of someone delivering a report they knew was going to be received badly. "How?" Ashby said. "The nurse from the hospital, the one who cleared Reeves for transport." "She's in the building." "We think so." A pause during which she could hear Ashby's specific quality of silence, the silence of a man recalculating rather than reacting. "The recording," Ashby said. "It's on this." He was talking to Collins about the drive. She could hear him moving, the sound of something being set on a hard surface, the particular click of a drive being removed from a laptop. "Find her," Ashby said, "and bring me Reeves. Whatever condition." Collins left through a second door. She heard it open and close, and she counted to 3 and then opened the door she was standing at. Ashby was at the desk with a small external drive in his hand and a laptop open in front of him. He was a man in his early 60s who had the appearance of someone who had spent a long career being the most capable person in most rooms, and he looked at her the way people looked at things they had underestimated, which was with a specific kind of irritation that came from the gap between expectation and reality. "Nora Callahan," he said. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes," she said. "Since we're being accurate." He set the drive down on the desk but kept his hand on it. "You're not supposed to be in this building. You called me and told me to come north on Route 9. That was an invitation. It was a conversation. It was enough." She stepped into the room and pulled the door shut behind her. She did not have a weapon. She had a medical kit and a torn sleeve and 3 years of ER nursing on top of everything else, and the arithmetic of the room was not simple. "I want the drive." "You're not in a position to want things. You're alone in a room, and you have 2 people outside dealing with a situation I created, and the tactical team from Voss's office is—" She checked the number in her head. "Approximately 7 minutes out. You're not in a position to tell me what position I'm in." Ashby looked at her. Something in him recalibrated. She watched it happen, watched the version of this conversation he had prepared for dissolve, and a new version form in its place. He was a smart man. She had always known he was a smart man. That was part of why the Korengal documentation mattered, because smart men who make deliberate choices needed deliberate documentation to face deliberate consequences. "The recording," he said slowly, "is not what you think it is. Tell me what it is. It's your voice, making statements under duress, in the immediate aftermath of a failed mission, when your judgment was compromised and your training was the only thing keeping you functional. It's not evidence of anything except that you were a human being in an impossible situation. Then you don't need to keep it." "I keep it," he said, "because it also contains statements about chain of command that could be taken to suggest that senior officers sanctioned decisions they didn't sanction, and in the wrong hands, in the wrong political climate, that recording becomes a liability for people who don't deserve one." She heard the framing. She had heard framings like it before from men who had spent careers in rooms where framing was the primary currency. "The people who don't deserve a liability," she said. "That's you." His jaw moved. "Among others." "The Korengal comms blackout was in the operational parameters you wrote. 4 people are dead because the extraction window opened while we were blind." She kept her voice steady. "That's not a statement made under duress. That's a documented fact that exists independently of any recording. The recording is me saying, in a room immediately after the mission, that I believe that was deliberate." "And do you still believe it?" "Yes." The room was quiet. "I believe it more now," she said, "because a man who made a navigational error in a mission parameter doesn't spend 4 years tracking a dead team's operational identities and running a private intelligence program and attempting to kill material witnesses. A man who made an error tries to manage the paperwork. A man who made a decision tries to manage the people." Ashby looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the drive and held it between them. "This is the only recording," he said. "There's no backup. You found the storage unit and retrieved the materials. I believe you on the recording." She took a step toward the desk. "But Cartwright is already outside this room. Reeves built a 3-source documentation architecture. The Kellner unit was one. You have it. The second is with a contact I haven't identified. The third—" She stopped. Because the third source was the 17 minutes on that drive, and Ashby's hand was tightening on it, and she was 4 feet away with no weapon, and Collins was somewhere in the building looking for her. And the 7 minutes she had cited for tactical support was an estimate that was about to prove either right or optimistic. "You came in here without a weapon," Ashby said. "I gave it to my patient. That's either very confident or very foolish. I've had people tell me both things about the same decision before." He looked at her. She looked back. The drive was in his hand. "The recording doesn't exonerate you," she said. "The Cartwright documentation does that on its own because it establishes a pattern of behavior that contextualizes everything before it, including Korengal. The recording just makes it personal." She kept her eyes on his. "Give it to me and I'll tell the investigators it was never relevant to Cartwright, because it wasn't. Korengal is separate. You can face Cartwright without facing Korengal." The offer was real. She meant it the way she meant most things, practically, without sentimentality. Korengal was 4 people she had trained with and trusted and mourned. Cartwright was an ongoing operation that had tried to kill Declan Reeves twice in 12 hours. They were not the same thing and did not require the same resolution. She watched him consider it. She watched him do the arithmetic she had already done. He held the drive out. She took it. Outside the door, somewhere in the second corridor, she heard footsteps. Then she heard something else. A different sound. Multiple sets of feet, moving with the coordinated speed of people who had done this before and were not being subtle because the time for subtlety was behind them. Ashby heard it too. His expression moved through something that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite resignation. It was the expression of a man who had made a 30-year career of controlling outcomes and was now, for perhaps the first time, watching one move beyond his reach. 7 minutes, she said, was an estimate. The door opened. The first person through it was a woman in tactical gear with a federal badge on a chain at her chest, and behind her were 3 more people in the same configuration, and they moved through the room with the efficient impersonality of a process completing itself. And Ashby's hands went up. Not dramatically, not with protest, just up, the way hands went up when the arithmetic was finished and the answer was what it was. She stepped back from the desk. She still had the drive. The agent nearest her looked at it. Deputy Director Voss wants chain of custody documented, the agent said. It's a recording from a 2021 debrief, Nora said. I'm the subject of the recording. It's personal property and it's not part of the Cartwright documentation. A pause. The agent looked at Ashby, who was being moved toward the door. Ashby said nothing. Deputy Director will have to clear that, the agent said. Fine, she said. Take me to the Deputy Director. What's up? Declan Reeves was in the gray sedan on the road's shoulder, which meant he had made it over the fence, which meant his post-surgical wound was either holding or he was running on something beyond physical capacity, which in her professional assessment was both admirable and a problem she would address shortly. She got in the passenger side. He looked at her. She looked at him. Ashby's in custody, she said. I heard vehicles. He was leaning against the headrest with the specific posture of someone managing pain by not moving. The drive. She held it up. He exhaled, a long, slow exhalation that contained more than relief. It contained 14 months of documentation and 4 years of operational context and the specific exhaustion of someone who had been right about something terrible and had paid for it and was only now reaching the far shore of it. The recording, she said. It's on here. Ashby retrieved the Kellner materials, but the drive, this drive, was what he had in his hands when the team came in. He was holding it. I took it. Reeves looked at her. The recording from your debrief, he said slowly. Yes. That's why he wanted you to come in, not just as a locator for the copies. He needed to control you directly because you're on the Korengal documentation, and that connects Cartwright backward through time to decisions he made before the program existed. She had worked this out in the room. She nodded. He used Cartwright to fund private operations that started before Cartwright, Reeves said. Korengal was one of them. He needed the team removed because the team was close to an intercept that would have exposed the earlier program. The comms blackout wasn't logistical. It was targeted. The words landed the way she had always known they would eventually land, with the specific weight of a thing confirmed rather than suspected, which was heavier than suspicion and lighter than she'd feared because at least confirmed was solid ground. 4 names, she said. I have them all in the documentation, with dates. She held the drive in her palm and looked at it. A federal convoy was moving up the access road toward the facility, their light bars painting the tree line in alternating blue and white, and the night had the particular quality of a thing that had been suspended now coming back to motion. The investigators are going to want to talk to both of us for a long time, she said. I know. I'm going to need to tell them who I am. I know that too. She looked at the drive. She thought about 8 months of blue scrubs and supply carts, and Harold with his indigestion, and Tobias on the phone at 11 in the morning. She thought about what it had cost to build that, and what it had cost to leave it, and whether there was a version of the rest of her life that contained something in between the 2 extremes she had been living between for 4 years. She put the drive in her pocket. You need imaging on that surgical site, she said. The stain on your shirt is fresh. I know that. We're going to need a medical team before we do anything else. Nora. He said her name with the specific quality of someone who was going to say something they needed to say while they still had the structural integrity to say it. I've been building the Cartwright case for 14 months. Before that, I spent 8 months trying to figure out what happened to Vantage Team. And before that, I spent 6 months in a debrief room watching investigators ask questions that didn't go anywhere. He paused. I knew the answers weren't going to come from inside the room. I knew that in month 1. I kept looking because of the 4 names. His voice was steady, but it cost him something to make it steady. And because I kept landing on a 5th name that was listed as deceased and didn't feel right. She said nothing. The people who ran Cartwright, he said, the ones who are going to be named tonight, 3 senior officers, 2 civilian contractors, and a financial structure that ran through 4 shell entities across 2 countries. That's the immediate case. That's what Voss and her team and the DOJ attorneys are going to spend the next 18 months on. He looked at her. But Korengal is older, and the authorization chain for Korengal goes through Ashby and doesn't stop at Ashby. She had suspected this. She had not asked because she had not been ready to ask. Who else? She said. A light swept across the interior of the car as the convoy turned into the access road. In the brief illumination, she saw his face clearly, the exhaustion, the pain he was managing, and beneath both of those, something that was not triumph exactly, because triumph was the wrong word for something this costly, but was adjacent to it. The authorization chain has 6 names, he said. Ashby is number 4. 3 names above Ashby in a chain of command for a mission that had killed 4 people under deliberate circumstances. She looked at the drive in her pocket. The recording, she said slowly. You said it was on this drive. The Kellner materials are on that drive. Yes. Ashby said it was a recording from my debrief. It is. But Declan looked at her with the expression of a man who had been waiting for this question. The recording from your debrief is 17 minutes, he said. I've listened to it 4 times. You say what happened in the valley. You say what you believed about the comms blackout. You say you have reason to think the parameters were written to produce a specific outcome. He paused. And then there's a voice on the recording you didn't know was there, because the debrief room was wired by someone other than the investigators running your debrief. Her chest was very still. Who was in the room? She said. The investigators, he said, and a third party who came in for the last 4 minutes. You were in shock by then. You might not have registered the door opening. The convoy had stopped at the facility gate. Agents were moving. Who? She said. He reached into his jacket pocket, the same jacket she'd seen when he came off the gurney, the field-worn one, and he pulled out a single folded paper, printed, which he had apparently been carrying through everything that had happened tonight. He held it out. She unfolded it. It was a transcript, the last 4 minutes of the debrief recording. At the bottom of the transcript, in the way transcripts documented room occupants, was a list of names. Investigators. Her name. And a 4th name listed as Observer, cleared, Level 5 access. She read the name. She read it again. Outside the car, an agent was walking toward them from the facility gate, and behind her the convoy lights were still turning, and in the facility beyond the fence the process of consequence was underway. Everything proceeding with the documented and institutional momentum of something that had been building for a very long time. She sat in the passenger seat of a gray sedan in the dark on the shoulder of Route 9 and held a piece of paper that changed the shape of everything she thought she had understood, and for a moment, just a moment, the woman who had spent 4 years being careful and contained and deliberately small let the full weight of it show on her face, because there was no one watching except someone who had earned the right to see it. The name on the transcript was Admiral Douglas Farron. She knew the name. Everyone who had operated at the level she had operated knew the name. The way you knew the names of people who shaped the architecture of things rather than the visible surface. Farron was not a field officer. He was not someone who wrote mission parameters or issued tactical directives. He was the kind of man who sat in rooms where decisions were made and ensured that the decisions were documented in ways that made them difficult to trace and easy to attribute elsewhere. He was also, as of 8 months ago, the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. She folded the paper. She folded it slowly and precisely, the same way she had been taught to fold anything that mattered. Once, twice, clean edges, no excess. And she put it in her jacket pocket beside the drive. Declan was watching her. You knew before tonight, she said. I confirmed it 6 weeks ago. Farron's signature is on a financial authorization that connects the private contractor network to the program that preceded Cartwright. The Korengal operational parameters went through Ashby's desk, but the original tasking came from Farron's office. Why is he on the recording? Because he came to assess you. After the debrief, he needed to know how much you understood about the command structure, and he needed to hear it in your words without asking you directly. Declan's voice was flat, in the way voices went flat when the facts being described were the kind that warranted anger, and anger was not currently useful. You were in shock. You talked about what you observed. You didn't name Farron because you had no way to know he was involved. But you described the structural logic of the comms blackout well enough that he needed to determine whether you were a risk. And he determined I was. He recommended the team's active status be reviewed. Within 3 months, the unit was declared inactive. Within 6, the cover story went through. The agent from the convoy was 30 feet away and walking. She had about 45 seconds. The drive, she said. The recording on this drive. Does it capture him in the room? It captures the door. It captures ambient sound consistent with a third occupant. And in the last 90 seconds, when the investigator stepped out, it captures his voice giving a single instruction to someone in the corridor. Declan paused. He said, and I am quoting exactly, "The Hayes situation needs to be managed before it becomes structural." Managed. That was enough, she said. That was everything. The agent reached the car and knocked on the window. She got out. Her name was Agent Daria Lowe. She was 41 years old. She had a specific quality of directness that Nora recognized as professional rather than personal, and she looked at the torn sleeve and the medical kit and then at Reeves through the car window and did not appear surprised by any of it. "Deputy Director Voss wants both of you at the tactical staging point," Lowe said. "We have a medical team on site. The patient," she glanced at Reeves, "needs attention before we do anything else." "He does," Nora said. "His surgical wound has been reopened. Probably minor, but he needs imaging." Lowe nodded and pulled out a radio. Nora walked to the passenger side and opened the door. "Can you walk?" she said. "Already did it once tonight." "You did it once tonight on adrenaline, and now the adrenaline is gone. Let me check the wound before you stand up." He let her. She peeled back the shirt edge and checked the dressing in the car's dome light. The stain was from seepage, not active bleeding. The sutures were intact, which was more than she would have predicted given everything his body had been through in the last 20 hours. She pressed the edges of the dressing, and he made a sound through clenched teeth that he tried to make not be a sound. "Intact," she said, "but you need a scan to confirm there's no internal re-bleed." "I know. You've been not telling me how much it hurts for the last 40 minutes. You didn't ask. I'm asking now." A pause. 7, maybe 8. She had worked enough trauma to calibrate that to approximately a 6 in real terms, because people in Reeves's professional category consistently underreported by 1 to 2 points. Still bad. Still something that needed to be properly addressed. She helped him out of the car. The staging point was 100 yards up the road. 2 vehicles, a portable command setup, and a medical unit that had arrived with the convoy. The medic who met them was efficient and young and visibly unsettled by the scope of what was happening around him, which was understandable given that he'd probably been briefed on a routine evidence retrieval and had arrived at something considerably more complicated. She gave him Reeves's medical history, the full picture, the original wound, the surgery, the IV compromise, the transport, the seepage, in the clinical shorthand of someone who had been that man's nurse for the last 20 hours. The medic listened and nodded and looked slightly overwhelmed and did his job. Nora stood back and watched and let him do it. She was, in this moment, specifically and only a nurse. Gishi. Carla Voss arrived at the staging point at 22:14, which was 41 minutes after the facility was secured, and she was not what Nora had constructed from 4 years of voice-only contact and reputation. She was smaller than expected, early 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the posture of someone who had spent so many years sitting in difficult rooms that her body had simply adapted to difficult rooms as the default environment. She wore no tactical gear. She had a coffee cup, which she was still drinking from when she crossed the gravel to where Nora was standing. She looked at Nora. Nora looked back. "You look different than your file," Voss said. "My file is 4 years old." "Your file says you're dead." People keep telling me that. Nora held the drive out. The Cartwright documentation, and a recording from a 2021 debrief that connects the Korengal operational parameters to a command structure that includes Admiral Douglas Farron. Voss took the drive. She looked at it the way people looked at small objects that contained large consequences, carefully, without expression. "You know what's on this," she said. "I know what Reeves told me is on it. I haven't listened to the recording myself. Do you want to?" Nora considered it. The honest answer was yes and also no, because yes was about the 4 people buried under cover stories, and no was about the particular mercy of not having to hear her own voice in the worst 40 minutes of her professional life playback in a field staging area at 10 in the evening. "Not tonight," she said. Voss nodded. "Farron is in Washington. He's been there all day. We have surveillance logs going back 72 hours. He did not have direct operational involvement in tonight's activity. He authorized Cartwright's existence. He was in the debrief room. The chain connects. Chains need to be built carefully at this level. It takes longer." "How much longer?" Voss looked at her steadily. "You asking me to give you a timeline?" "I'm asking whether this ends or gets managed." The word landed between them the way she had intended it to land. "Managed," Voss said. "Farron's word, from the recording, the Hayes situation needs to be managed." She held Voss's gaze. "I've spent 4 years being managed. The 4 people on my team spent 4 years being manageable because they're dead. I want to know whether this investigation has the scope and the authority to reach the 6th name on the authorization chain, or whether Ashby takes the weight and the structure above him gets protected." Voss was quiet for a moment. "The scope is full," she said. "The authority is confirmed at the Attorney General level. This opened 3 hours ago as a formal criminal referral, not an internal review." A pause. "It took longer than it should have because 2 of the people who needed to recuse themselves didn't do so voluntarily." "Who broke it open?" Voss glanced toward the medical unit where Reeves was being assessed. 14 months of documentation sent to the right desk by someone who knew which desks were actually the right ones. Nora looked at the staging area around her. The agents, the equipment, the facility with its lights now fully illuminated behind the fence, the ordinary darkness of a Virginia highway pressing in at the edges. It had the feeling of things in motion, which was different from the feeling of things resolved, and she had learned to be careful about mistaking one for the other. "I need something from you," she said. "Tell me. When the investigation reaches the point where my debrief testimony is relevant, to Korengal, to the command structure, to any of it, I want to give it on the record, not as background, not as a source." She looked at Voss directly. "I've been background for 4 years. I want to be on the record." Voss held the drive in her palm. "That," she said, "I can do." They kept her at the staging point until past midnight, which was the part of the night that felt the longest. The part after the acute crisis, when the body remembered it was tired and the mind started processing things it had been deferring. Agent Lowe took her initial statement in a gray van that served as a mobile interview room, and Nora gave it accurately and completely, starting from the moment the ambulance bay doors opened at 2:17 and ending with the drive in her hand in the facility. She left nothing out, including who she was. Lowe wrote it all down without visible reaction, which was professionalism of a specific kind that Nora respected. "The identity documentation," Lowe said at the end, "the Nora Callahan credentials. Legally established through a process I'm not going to detail in this statement. You'll find it in whatever file has my official status from 4 years ago. That file is currently classified at a level that requires Deputy Director authorization to access. Then get the Deputy Director to authorize it." Lowe looked at her. "You're not concerned about the identity exposure." "I've been using a name that isn't mine for 4 years. The original name is mine. I'd like it back." The van was quiet. Outside, the activity of the staging area continued. Vehicles, voices, the mechanical sounds of an operation winding into its documentation phase. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes," Lowe said. Not a question, just the name, placed carefully in the space between them like something being returned to its owner. "That's me," Nora said. "Sec." Declan was in a field cot in the second van when she found him at 12:30, wrapped in the kind of thin emergency blanket that was never warm enough but was better than nothing, with an IV line in his right arm that was actually placed properly this time, and a portable monitor beside him that was actually plugged in. His eyes were open. "Clear scan," she said, because Lowe had told her before she came over. "I heard." He shifted slightly and the monitor flickered. "They want me in a proper facility by morning." "You should have been in a proper facility 12 hours ago." "Yes, that didn't work out." She sat on the equipment case across from him. Her back hurt from the fence. Her wrist hurt from the landing. She was going to have a bruise on her left forearm that would prompt questions from every colleague who saw it for the next 10 days. And the explanation she would give was going to be something mundane that was technically defensible. Or maybe not. Maybe she was done with the mundane defenses. "The fourth name," she said, "on the Korengal chain, after Farron. We can go through the full documentation when you've... Tell me now." He looked at her, decided. "A civilian contractor named Merit Holdings. 3 principals. They provided the technical infrastructure for the Cartwright financial routing, and they provided the operational logistics for the Korengal mission, including the comms architecture." He watched her face. "The comms blackout was implemented by a Merit Holdings technician, not military personnel. That's how Ashby kept it off the official record. A contractor ran the blackout. And Ashby provided authorization that was routed through Farron's office in a way that made it look like standard operational security protocol." He paused. "The investigators will spend months unwinding it, but the core structure is clean and the documentation is solid." She absorbed this. The contractor had cut the communications at hour 3. Her team had spent 2 hours in operational silence, executing a mission in a valley where the timing of the ambush, its precision, its specific positioning, had required someone to know exactly where they were at every moment, which the comms blackout had ensured could not be communicated outward. She had known this in the debrief. She had said it in the debrief. She had been managed afterward and had spent 4 years carrying what she knew in a place where it couldn't do anything. The weight of that, not the event itself, which she had lived with long enough that it had become a known shape in her chest, but the specific weight of having been right and silenced. She felt it move, not disappear, but shift, the way weight shifted when it was finally being shared. "The 4 names," she said, "are all in the documentation. You said that before, but I need you to say it again." He held her gaze. "Priya Ose, Marcus Tull, Ray Vandenberg, Kenji Abara." He said them clearly, without rushing, the same way you said names that deserve to be said completely. "All 4, with confirmed connection to the Korengal operational parameters and the chain of command that produced them." She had not said their names aloud in a very long time. She sat with the names for a moment. Then she got up, because there was more to do, and she had learned a long time ago that the way you honored the dead was by doing the next thing completely. The formal investigation announced itself publicly 11 days later. She was at work when it happened, actual work, morning shift, because Harwick General had not closed and patients had not stopped needing care because an off-books federal facility 30 miles north had been raided on a Tuesday night. She was in Bay 3 checking the dressing on a construction worker's compound fracture when Tobias appeared in the doorway and said quietly, "It's on the news." She finished the dressing first. Then she went to the break room where the small TV on the counter was showing the DOJ press conference, and she stood in the back of the room. There were 4 other staff in there, all of them watching, and she listened. The Assistant Attorney General was a measured woman who read from a prepared statement and took no questions. And the statement described a federal criminal indictment of 6 individuals, including a general officer and a former defense official, in connection with a domestic intelligence operation involving unauthorized data transfers, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and charges related to the wrongful deaths of 4 military personnel in a 2021 overseas operation. The statement did not use the name Cartwright. It did not use the word Korengal. It did not use her name. It used 4 other names: Priya Ose, Marcus Tull, Ray Vandenberg, Kenji Abara. The statement described them as members of a special operations unit whose deaths were determined by the investigation to have resulted from deliberate operational decisions made by individuals now charged. She stood in the back of the break room and listened to their names read aloud by a woman at a podium who had never known them. And she did not cry because she was at work and had 4 more patients, and because she had said goodbye to them in ways that did not require public witness. But she pressed her palm flat against the wall behind her. Cold cinder block. She focused on that. Tobias appeared beside her. He watched the screen and then looked at her, and she could see him doing the calculation that he had probably been doing since 11 o'clock on a morning more than a week ago when she told him to stay away from the 3rd floor. "That's connected to what happened," he said. Not a question. "Yes." A pause. "Are you all right?" She thought about whether to give him the honest answer or the functional one, and then she thought about the fact that Tobias had called her at 11 in the morning on a day off because he didn't know who else to trust, and that was worth the honest answer. "Not completely," she said, "but more than I was yesterday." He nodded. That was enough for him, and it was enough for her. Preston Garfield came to find her on the 2nd day after the indictment announcement. She was at the nursing station finishing a chart when she heard his particular footstep. She had learned his footstep in 8 months of sharing a department without speaking about anything except patients, and she looked up. He stood at the edge of the station. He looked like he had been sleeping badly, which was fair because the federal investigators had talked to him twice in the past week, and those conversations had apparently gone on long enough to constitute a significant review of recent choices. "I've been trying to figure out how to say something," he said. She waited. "When they told me you were a security risk," he stopped. "I wanted to believe it. I want to be honest about that. It was easier than the alternative." "What was the alternative?" "That I had spent 8 months being unpleasant to someone I didn't bother to understand, and the reason she didn't respond to it the way I expected was because she had a context I'd never asked about." He said it with the flat precision of someone who had been over the words many times. "I told myself your clinical judgment was uncertain because you seem nervous. Your hands." "I shake when things are ordinary," she said. "I stop when someone is dying. I couldn't explain that without explaining why." He absorbed this. "I made it harder for you to do your job," he said, "for 8 months. And then I made it harder for you to protect someone who needed protection." A pause. "I want you to know that I understand the full dimension of that, not just the part that's in the investigator's report." She looked at him. He was not an easy man and was not suddenly becoming one. She could see the discomfort in how he was holding himself, the effort of an admission that did not come naturally to his character. That was real. People who found humility uncomfortable and did it anyway were doing something harder than people who found it easy, and she had never been interested in demanding that difficulty be invisible. "You confirmed patient stability for transport when I asked you to," she said. "That was the right side of the ledger. That was the minimum. Most people don't clear the minimum when it's inconvenient. You did." She held his gaze. "I don't need an apology, Preston. I need you to treat the next 8 nurses the way you'd treat someone whose context you don't know, because you won't know it. You never know it." He was quiet for a moment. "That's a very specific lesson," he said. "It's the one I have." He nodded once and walked away, and she went back to the chart. Voss called her on day 14. She took the call in her car in the hospital parking structure, engine off, because some conversations needed walls. "Farron," Voss said, "tell me." Arrested this morning at his residence in Georgetown. He retained counsel before federal agents reached his door, which suggests he knew the timeline was closing. The charge sheet is 31 counts. A pause. "The recording is on the evidentiary record. His voice, your voice, the instruction about the Hayes situation being managed. The FBI's audio analysis confirmed the room configuration and occupant count. His legal team will challenge it. They will lose." She let out a slow breath. "The Korengal wrongful death charges," she said. "All 6 individuals on the authorization chain are named. The 2 surviving principals, Farron and a Merit Holdings officer named Darren Kale, are charged with conspiracy in the deaths of Priya Osai, Marcus Tull, Ray Vandenberg, and Kenji Abara." Voss's voice was measured, but there was something underneath it that was not pure professionalism. "This will take time. The legal process will be long and contested. I want you to be prepared for that. I've been prepared for a long time." "I know." A pause. "There's something else. The Navy has been briefed on the investigation and on the circumstances of Vantage Team's deactivation. There will be a formal review of the unit's status. The 4 personnel will be posthumously recognized through appropriate channels. And Voss stopped briefly. Your own service record is being reviewed for correction. The declaration of death will be formally rescinded. Your rank and commendation record will be restored. The parking structure was concrete and fluorescent and completely ordinary. She sat in it with the phone against her ear. That's not why I came forward, she said. I know that too. I'm telling you anyway because the record being wrong was not a small thing, and correcting it is not a small thing, even if it isn't why you acted. She thought about that, about what it meant to have a record corrected versus what it meant to have done what needed to be done. Those were separate events. She had always understood that. The action and the recognition were not connected at the moment of the action, and anyone who needed them connected in order to act was probably not going to act at the right moment. But the record being corrected mattered. It mattered because Priya Osei and Marcus Tull and Ray Vandenberg and Kenji Ibarra would also have their records corrected, and those records belonged to people who could not speak for themselves anymore, and the correction was the closest thing to witness that the institution could offer. Thank you, she said. She meant it. One more thing, Voss said. And I'm asking this as a question, not a proposal. The investigation will require ongoing cooperation from someone who understands the Vantage Team operational history. Reeves is the primary documentation source, but there are aspects of the Korengal mission and the command structure that he doesn't have first-hand knowledge of. A pause. You do. I'm a nurse at Harwick General. I know what you are. I'm asking if you'd also be willing to be a consulting resource to the investigative team. On your terms. Your schedule. No operational role. She looked at the concrete wall of the parking structure. She thought about what her terms were and what they would need to include, and whether she was willing to spend pieces of herself on this process that would be long and contested and would require her to say in formal settings what she had spent 4 years saying only in her own head. She thought about the break room and the television, and 4 names read by a woman at a podium. On my terms, she said. On your terms. Then yes. 3 weeks after the raid, she drove to Kellner County on a Saturday morning. The storage facility was a private place. Row after row of orange metal doors in a flat, scrubby lot off the county road. Lot 7C was a 10x10 unit, combination lock, and the combination was a date she had chosen 4 years ago because she had needed something she would never forget and had settled on the date the unit was officially declared inactive. She opened the lock. Inside was a plastic storage bin and a black duffel that needed resealing and a smaller case that she had put in here 2 months after building the identity and had not opened since. She stood in the lot's October light looking at these things. The drive had been taken by federal investigators as evidence. The bin was records she had kept from the operational period, not classified materials, personal records, things that belonged to the person she had been before she became Nora Callahan. She was still Nora Callahan. She was also Lieutenant Commander Hayes, and the question of how to hold both of those things in the same body was one she was still working out. She picked up the smaller case. Inside was a photograph, a set of dog tags, and a folded letter she had written to herself in the 6 months after Korengal, when she was still deciding whether to disappear entirely or find a version of existing that was possible. The letter was not good writing. It was the kind of writing that happened at 3 in the morning when everything had been stripped away and what was left was just the unedited version of your own thinking. She had written it in case she needed to remember who she was when she couldn't feel it. She read it. She had needed to be invisible, the letter said. She had needed to be quiet and safe, and in a place where nobody asked her to be what she had been. And she had done that. And it had given her something, time, distance, the specific clarity that came from being a person without a history for a little while. And she was grateful for it, even though it had also cost her things. Identity cost you things whichever direction you moved in. The letter ended with a question that she had not been able to answer when she wrote it. She could answer it now. The question was, if you came back, what would you come back as? She folded the letter. She took the dog tags out of the case and held them in her palm. Her name. Her service number. The raised metal letters of a person who had been officially dead for 4 years and was now, by the same institutional machinery that had declared her dead, being officially returned to the record. She put the dog tags around her neck. They were heavier than she remembered. She left the lot in the same gray sedan, which she was going to keep because it had been through enough with her that replacing it felt disloyal, and she drove back to Port Caldwell. She had a shift at 6. She had a grocery list she had been deferring for 5 days. She had a call scheduled with the federal investigative team's lead attorney on Monday morning that would take most of the morning and cover ground she would need to prepare for. She had, in other words, a life. Declan Reeves was discharged from a proper medical facility 16 days after the raid, which was 4 days longer than he thought was necessary and about right by every clinical standard. He called her from the facility parking lot when he was in the car. "Discharged," he said. "I heard. They want me in Washington for the first week of depositions." "When?" "Monday." "I have a call with the attorney Monday morning." A pause. "Same attorney?" "Apparently." He was quiet for a moment. She could hear him in the car, the ambient sound of an institutional parking lot transitioning into the sound of a road. "Nora," he said. "Hayes," she said. "I'm working on going back to Hayes. That's going to take me a while to adjust to." "Take your time." Another pause, this one comfortable in the way pauses became comfortable when you had been through something together that required no summary. "The deposition," he said. "It's going to be long." "I know. And after it there'll be more. Months of more." "I know that too." "Are you going to be all right?" She was at a traffic light on the main road through Port Caldwell. On her left was the coffee place she went to on mornings when she was early for shift. On her right was a hardware store. Ahead was the hospital, 5 blocks up, its upper floors visible above the lower buildings. "Ask me again in 6 months," she said. "I'll have a better answer." "Fair enough?" The light changed. "Thank you," she said, "for not leaving the name alone." "Priya would have done the same," he said. "For any of us." She thought that was probably true. She said goodbye and drove the 5 blocks to the hospital and parked and walked through the main entrance with her badge and her dog tags under her shirt, and her name, the real one, the original one, the one she was going to sign on the next form that asked for it, ready in her mouth like something she had been keeping safe until it was time to use it again. Yes. The thing nobody tells you about surviving is that it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like waking up in the same body with a different set of facts and having to decide with that same imperfect body and limited knowledge what to do with the day in front of you. She had not saved the world. She had documented a corruption and forced it into a process that would grind through the evidence and produce consequences in the slow, institutional way that consequences were produced, and 4 people who were dead would remain dead, and the people who had arranged that would face what they faced, and none of that was the same as undoing it. But it was something. It was the thing that could be done from where she stood with what she had, which was the only measure she had ever applied to anything. She put on her scrubs. She checked the board. Bay 4 had a compound fracture, and Bay 6 had a chest pain, and there was a child in the waiting room with a fever that needed to be triaged. And Bay 2 had someone who had come in alone at 5 in the morning and was sitting on the edge of the exam table with the specific posture of a person who had decided that the emergency room at 5 in the morning was the only place they could think of to go. And she knew that posture because she had been that posture in a different building, in a different city, in the first winter after Korengal. And she went to Bay 2 first. The woman on the table was 32, she said. She had been having chest pain for 2 days and hadn't said anything to anyone. "Why not?" Nora said. "I didn't want to bother anyone." Nora put on her gloves and began the assessment. "You're here now," she said. "That's the part that matters." The woman looked at her with the particular relieved exhaustion of someone who had finally permitted themselves to ask for help, and Nora worked, efficiently, attentively, the way she had always worked, the way she would keep working because this was the job, and the job was not separate from anything else she was and had never been. She was the thing she had always been, someone who ran toward the room where it was bad, not away from it. That had not required a uniform. It had not required a rank or a record or anyone's recognition. It had been true in a valley in 2021, and it had been true in Bay 1 at 2:17 in the morning, and it was true now in Bay 2 with a woman who hadn't wanted to bother anyone. and it would be true tomorrow and the day after. You didn't become someone when the world finally saw you. You just kept being who you already were until the light changed, and then you kept going after that too.